Hey guys, this is Fred from Pretty Fly Games, and today we're going to continue with our top-down car controller built in Unity. Today we're going to go through how you can add a car selector like this in your game, so that you can select different cars that have different sprites and different information about them. We'll also go through how you spawn them in the game world later on, so you can race around with them. So let's get started in Unity. So let's start off by creating a new scene. Go to new scene and let's save it as menu. Then we'll take our prefab that we have already created for our UI, the canvas in-game, and let's go and unpack it completely, and we'll call it canvas menu instead. So this already has our leaderboard in it, as we can see, and we will actually use this part for our car selection. So let's just move it somewhere in the center, and we can remove this leaderboard list because we don't need it anymore. And then we have a background image, and we'll call it background header image, because that's just on the top here. And then we want to make another background image, and this one, let's make it a little bit darker, and we'll make it 100% visible, and we'll stretch it in all directions, and we can make it even a little bit more dark. Something like that. Alright, awesome. And now we will change the text from leaderboard to select car. And we also probably want to have some text in our menu, like a cool, name for our game. So let's duplicate our header here and just move it up and make it, let's change the camera color to actually be a solid color, and we can change it into something dark like that. So then let's change our logo text here, and we'll call it some name for our game, awesome car game. Car game. And let's stretch it to the full width and make it a little bit bigger, like 300, and move it up. And then we will change the font size to be something like 200, and let's just make it white so it sticks out a little bit. And we can also change it, oh, it's already bold. Awesome car, we're missing game, so it's too big. 150. Yes, excellent. So now that works. Okay, so perfect. Now we can start with actually creating the selection part here for our select car object. And what we have is a background image, it's this one. And what we want is to be able to have a car that comes in from the side and moves into the center part. So let's go and create a UI, and we'll do an image. And this is going to be our car. So let's go to sprites. We'll take our red car, and then we can set it to native size, and we'll use the preserve aspect. Okay, so we have car image, and let's just center it a bit. It's a little bit big, so let's make it a little bit smaller. Maybe 70% will be something that is suitable, something like that. So when the car appears, we want it to move from this side into this area, but we only want it to be visible when it's actually inside of our background here. So how we do that is we go to our background image, and we will add something called a mask to it. And excellent, so now it's added. And then the car image, if we move it in, we can see that, yeah, it's visible all the time. But if we make this a child of our background image, then the mask will start to work. So now we have this view that it's actually only showing the image when it's inside the mask. So if we spawn the car over here and we move it in, it will look at like it's animated. And when we are changing the car, we can move it out again. All right, so if we center this one at the center of this box, then we want to change this into a prefab. And what we can do is we can duplicate our image, and we will call this car object, and then prefab. And then we'll make the car image a child of our car object prefab, and we'll remove the image from this one. So this way, actually let's make it that one 100% because it's easier to handle the scale on the image. So this way we can have different car images with different settings, and we will keep our car object prefab, and we will actually control most of the animations and things on the actual main object. So this is a way that I usually do things when I handle everything, you know, when you're building characters in games or adding cars. I always add the image as a separate object and don't keep it on the top one. Then it's easier to replace it with something else or anything without breaking the animations and things. So that's something that I strongly recommend. All right, so if we have our cars, we have our prefabs with our cars and UI. So let's call this a car UI object instead. Car UI object prefab, right? So let's make a prefab out of that because it's easier to work with the prefabs. And now what we want to do is we want to be able to animate this. So we will do it with an animated controller. So we'll add an animator, and we will create a folder as well to keep the animations in a place. And we also need a car animation controller to start with. So let's go and find that animation controller, and we'll call it car UI animation controller. Awesome. So let's assign that to our car prefab. Okay, so now we can create the animations. So let's go in animation, and then we'll create, and we will call it car UI appear from right. So now we're in the animation mode, and we can hit the record button. And we want it to appear from the right, so we want it to start something like on 368, and then we want it to move in after a short period of time, something like that maybe. And so if we play this now, stop recording, and we play, we can see that, yeah, the car is moving in from the side. So that looks okay. The animation is looping, but that's fine. We can change that later. And then we want to do the same thing, but from the left. So let's take our car UI appear from right animation. We duplicate it, and we'll call it from left. And then let's open our animation. And yeah, it's not here, and the reason is because it has not been assigned to our animation. So if we instead go on the window and we look at animation, and we'll open our animator, then we can see that, okay, so we have our car UI appear from right and car UI appear from left, but it's not assigned to this object yet. And the reason is because the motion is not set in here. So what we do is we go here and we look at our car animation appear from left, and we assign that motion to it. So now it actually has an animation, and if we go in our animation, it will appear. So now we have that. So the left one, right now it's going in the wrong direction because we need to change that. So let's just, we don't have to record. We can just take this position, 368, put a minus sign in front of it, and then it should update like that. So now we have our appear animation, and what we want is we want to have a disappear animation as well. So let's take our car appear and we duplicate it, and let's call it car UI disappear to left. We can start with the left one. And again, if we look at animation for our object, then it's not here. So let's go into our animator again, and we can have a look at, okay, it's not registered. So we want to have the disappear. Let's drag and drop it in here. And it actually had a motion this time for some reason. So that's cool. So if we go back into our object and look at animation, and we'll look at the disappear from left in our scene view, then we want it to disappear to the left. So what we want is this whole thing to be reversed, right? So we want it to exit on 368 and start at 0. So if we play it, we can see that, yeah, it didn't work because I didn't actually change the values here. So that's a little bit wrong. So what we want is for it to, there we go. Let's see. Yay, now it's working. No, it's not. So why isn't it working? It is moving from our 368 position, and should be moving from our 0 position, and we want it to move to the minus. What is it with me today? We want it to move to our let's record instead. Sorry for that. Minus 368, and we'll move it from 0. So now it's exiting to our left. Awesome. So sorry about that messing around. It happens to all of us. Awesome. So let's replicate this disappear to left, and we'll have it disappear to right instead. And let's record that as well. So we have disappear to left, and it's working, yes. And let's make sure that it's in our animation. So let's add that disappear to right, and it has the motion, perfect. So let's go into our animation again and have a look at that, and let's change that car disappear to right. So what we want here is to change this value from minus 368 to 368. So now it is disappearing to right. Perfect. So that's all of the animations that we actually need for now. And for some reason our animator is deactivated, so let's just enable that, and then we'll actually apply the changes that we have made to our prefab. Alright, so now we are ready to actually start creating the scripts, and we actually have a little bit of a mess with our scripts here, so let's sort this out, and we'll create a folder called car, and let's just put everything related to the car in one place. Alright, my computer froze a bit here. Alright, there we go. And the wheel stuff as well. Let's put them in there as well. Alright, so now we want to be able to have a script that actually controls how we are selecting the cars. So let's go in UI, and we'll create a new script for that, and let's call it select car UI handler. And then we will take our leaderboard canvas that we have called it. So let's change that to select car canvas. And let's remove our leaderboard handler from here, and let's replace that with our select car UI handler. And let's open that in Visual Studio. So in our select car UI handler class, we want to be able to instantiate or spawn a version of our prefab that we have created for the car UI. So let's add we'll add a header so it becomes nice and clean, car prefab. We haven't actually used this header before, but it's an excellent way to actually show things in the inspector in Unity so that we can see what it is. So by using header and then the string, we actually get a field that says car prefab header, and then we have this in our inspector that we can assign to it. So we want to be able to take in a game object, that's our car prefab, and we want to spawn this prefab on the background element, because it needs to be a child of our background element for the masking to work. So let's do another header, and we'll call it spawn on, and then we will take in a transform that we want to spawn on. And then what we want to do is, as well, we want to be able to control a few states. So we want to know if we are changing cars or not. So let's add that. Bool is changing cars or changing car. Excellent. So what we want to do is we want to have some way of changing cars, and we can do it through keyboard inputs, or we can do it through UI inputs. But we will start with the keyboard inputs. So what we want to do is essentially we want to be able to create a new car, instantiate it, and then change that when the user is pressing the sort of left or right buttons. So let's start with the car instantiation, and we will do that as a coroutine. So we will create an I enumerator, which is a coroutine, and we'll call it spawn car CO. I usually call my coroutines CO, so I remember that, yeah, it's a coroutine. And it will take in a variable called is car appearing on right side. So we want to know if the car is going to spawn on the right side or left side. And that depends on which button a user presses. So if they are pressing the left button, then we want the car to spawn on the right side. If they are pressing the right button, then we want this car to spawn on the left side. All right, so we will get into that a little bit later. But let's just start with the car spawning first. So once we have called this function, we want to signal that, yeah, we are changing cars. And when we are done with it, we want to say that, okay, we are no longer changing cars. So we have a state for that. And what we want to do is we want to start by, okay, we want to instantiate a car. And what we will do is we will call instantiate with our car prefab. So we have this instantiate car prefab, and we want it to spawn on a specific object, so it becomes a child. So instantiate has this ability to take in an object that we should instantiate and the parent. So we are adding the parent here, spawn on. So when we are doing this, automatically it will be a child of this object. Then later on we want to be able to actually work a little bit with this car. So let's actually take we will store it as a variable. So instantiate returns a game object. So let's store that as instantiated car, because we will need it later. Then we have an error here because we have not we are not using the yield that we need to do. So let's add that so it doesn't complain anymore. And why we have this yield and why we're using coroutine is because we want the animation to be able to complete before we can spawn another car. So by adjusting this wait for seconds value, we can make sure that our animation actually has the time to spawn the car, move it into the right position, and be done before we are spawning the next car. So when we are starting when we're starting the script, we want a car to appear. So we need to call this spawn car CO. So let's do that in our start coroutine and spawn CO true. And we don't have to check if it's running or not, because we know that it's actually not running. So if we are pressing a button, let's say that we are pressing the left arrow and we are not changing our car, then we want to, if we are pressing the left arrow button and we're not changing cars, then we want to start the coroutine as well. As we are pressing the left arrow, it means that we want the car to appear from the right side, so we assign it with true. So if we save this now and try it in Unity and see what happens. So let's select our prefab in the UI, and we have the car UI object. So let's assign that to our car prefab, and we'll take the background image and make that as the spawn on transform, and then we'll get rid of our old prefab. We don't need it anymore, so we can just delete it. And then we press play, and a car should appear. Alright, as we can see, it's appearing and disappearing all the time. And the reason for this is because our animation is looping, and we don't want that. We want it to play once. So let's go under animations, and we'll select all of our animations. Multi-object editing is not supported, so we can't do that. So let's do it one by one. Remove loop time from all of them. And then if we press play again, it should no longer loop. We should just get one car spawned. Alright, so now we can see that we have a clone here. That's what's happening when we are instantiating the car, and it moved from the right to this part. So that's perfect. So if we hit our button, we can see that, okay, now we have another car. Awesome. And we can do the same. We can do it lots of times, and we have a lot of cars. And this is not exactly the behavior we want. We want to be able for the car to spawn, move to this center part, and we want the old car to move out and then disappear. So to be able to handle that, we need to create a new script. So let's go out of play mode. So let's go into scripts, UI, and we create a new script, and we'll call this car UI handler. So this script actually goes on our prefab. So let's select our UI and car UI object prefab, and then let's add that and car UI handler. Perfect. So let's open that in Visual Studio. So let's get rid of the update function because we won't need that. And what we want to do is we want to handle or control the animations. So we'll create a public function for that, and we will call it start car entrance animation, and we will have a variable similar as we had on our select car UI if it's appearing on the right side or not. So if it is appearing on the right side, then we want to play our animation called car UI appear from right. So what we can do is we can actually use our animator. So let's create a reference to our animator, and we need to use our awake function to actually get that. So let's do void awake. And then we need to get our reference to it. So let's use our get component in children, and we'll fetch an animator. Perfect. So now we have that. Now we can actually use this. So normally an animator is it's like a state machine really. It handles a lot of things, and you can do a lot of complex things with it, and you can build a lot of states. So it's like a flowchart. But we can also tell it exactly which animation it should play. So we can just do an animator.play. And this is the animation state name, which actually also in our case happens to be the same name as our animation. So let's just add the name of the animation, which was car UI appear from right. And if it is appearing from the other side, then we will do the opposite, which is car UI appear from left. And then we want to have an exit animation. So when it's actually exiting, then we want to do the same thing here. So we have start car exit animation, and we have a variable called is exiting on the right side. If it is exiting on the right side, we will play our car UI disappear to right. And if it's doing the opposite, we will do a car UI disappear to left. So this makes the cars move in from one side and exit on the other side, which is perfect. But we also want to destroy them, because otherwise it's just going to stack up and we're going to have hundreds of cars in the scene, which we don't want. So let's add an event that we can trigger. It's really a sort of another way of doing it, but let's look at that. So we're going to have an on car exit animation completed. So when we have played our little exit animation here, then we are done with the object and we don't really need it anymore. So we can just destroy the game object. Oh yeah, I was a little bit lazy actually. When I'm using get component in children, which sounds like it should actually fetch it the animator in the children, but it's actually not a child. But get component in children will also get the animator even if it's on the same level. So you can use that if you're a little bit lazy. That will get the animator even if it's on the same level or a child. All right, so perfect. Let's go into our select car UI handler. And what we want is we want to have a reference to this component that we have just created. So let's add that, and we'll start with it as null. And when we are instantiating our car in our spawn car CO, then we want to actually get a reference to this. So when we have instantiated it, let's use our instantiated car get component with a car UI handler to it. So what we want to do after that is when the car has appeared, we want to start our animation. So now that we have a reference to it, we can actually use it. So car UI handler will use our start car entrance animation with this variable is car appearing on right side. What we want to do as well is we want the old car to exit if there is an old car. So we can check that and say that, okay, if there is a car, if it's not null, then what we want to do is we want to start the exit animation with the opposite. So if it's appearing on the right side, we want it to leave on the left side. So we'll use a not signal or a not sign before this. That means that it's the reversed. It's not is appearing on the right side. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to save this and go back into Unity. So if we hit the play button, we will see that a car is appearing, and if we hit the left arrow button, a new car is spawned and the animation seems to work fine. The only problem we have left is that the cars are still filling up because they are not getting destroyed, because the event that should cause them to get destroyed is never called. So we need to fix that. So the easiest way to do that is going to our prefab, the car UI object prefab, and then we'll go into animation, and let's go to our car UI disappear to left and scroll to the end of that animation. Now we want to add an event, and this is a way to do it. So let's press add event, and that adds this little event indicator. And from the function we can now select our on car exit animation completed, and we do the same for car UI disappear to right, and scroll to the end of it, add a event, and then on car. All right, so then we exit our prefab and we press play, and we should now have a nice car that is getting destroyed as it's exiting. So here you can see that now we have 2 cars for a short period of time, and then it's getting destroyed. So that's awesome. So what we want to now change is the car is the same car all the time. So we want a new car to spawn. We want different cars. So for us to handle that, we need some type of data structure to be able to tell what car color we should use, what sprite should the car have when it's in this UI, and what car should later on be spawned when we're playing the game. So the easiest way to do this is to use something called scriptable objects. So a scriptable object is a way of actually keeping track of data of our cars and other objects in the game. So let's create a new folder, and we'll call them scriptable objects. And in our scriptable object, we're going to create a new scriptable object, and it's going to be called car data. So let's open that in Visual Studio. So the first part is that we want to change the car data to not derive from mono behavior, but we want it to derive from scriptable object instead. And scriptable objects, it is data files essentially that is created in assets. So we want to be able to control how we are creating these, and we do it through the menu in Unity. So the first thing we need to do is add actually the menu part. So let's add a create asset, and we'll call the file name, it's going to be new car data, and the menu name is going to be car data, and the order is 51. You can change the order to anything you want, but 51 works for us right now. So then we can get rid of our start and update functions. And what we want is different type of information about the car. So the first part we want to have is a car unique ID, and it's going to be a serialized field, and it's a private variable, an integer. So it's just a way of having a unique number for each car that we will utilize later on. Then we want to have the ability to use different car sprites. So we want to be able to change how the car looks. So let's add another serialized field. It's going to be a sprite, car UI sprite. You could also actually have a prefab here and have different prefabs being instantiated. But for now, we are actually going to use a sprite and just change the sprite part when we are creating the UI. But when it comes to actually creating the car itself, we are going to use a prefab for that. So we're going to have a car prefab, and that's a game object, and it's also going to be serialized. Perfect. So now we can create this data, but we also need to be able to read the data. So we will use the standard get and set sort of methodology of C#. So we use a public int car unique ID, and we return the car unique ID. And we do the same for the other fields. So now we can get them from our other scripts. Let's just clean up those extra spaces. Okay, so let's save this and go back into Unity. Now the car data can be stored anywhere inside our assets, but I'm gonna make it easier for us to actually be able to add cars as we go along, and make it easier than just keeping track of all of them and have to assign them through the inspector, etc. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a new folder, and we're gonna call it resources. So resources is a special folder that Unity uses to store information and things like that that we can utilize in our scripts. So in our resources, let's create a new folder, and let's name that car data, because that's what we're going to have in it. So let's go and call it folder car data. Then in our car data, we now have this new option called car data, and that's from our scriptable object. So now we have new car data. So that's what it's called. But let's change that into, I usually use a 1 in front of it so I can sort things. And we'll call it Racer Red as an example. And that's going to be our first car. So car unique ID is 0. And then we need a car UI sprite. So let's go and first of all, let's lock this. So locked means that even if I click something else, we will still see this. So let's go into sprites. And we have our nice red sprite. As you see, when I click it, this does not change because I'm in locked mode. So car UI sprite, we have our red racer. Let's assign that. And then we have the car prefab that we're going to instantiate when we are running the game. So prefab cars. And we have our car. Great. Then we can unlock it because now we have stored this information. So in our car data we have our number 1 racer red, and we can duplicate it, and let's have a number 2 racer, and we'll call it blue. And let's lock that. Car ID 1, we add just 1 to it, and then the car sprite is not going to be the red one. Let's pick the blue one instead. And we will not use the same car prefab because this already is our nice red car. So let's just bring it into the scene, and in car sprites we can unlock this so we get to see it. This is the red one. Let's change to the blue one, and then we can call it car blue. And let's go back in here, and then we hold our mouse button and drag it down here and release, just like you create a prefab. Then we get this dialog asking, okay, what do you want to do? We want to create either an original prefab or a prefab variant. So by selecting prefab variant, it will actually just be the changes that we have done. So it will be the blue car instead. But if we change anything in our main car here, then all those changes will be actually changed here as well. So it's an easy way to well, create lots of cars with the different variations and still inherit from the main car. Great, so let's go into our car data again, because we haven't changed our car prefab. So let's take our car blue prefab and assign that. All right, so perfect. Now let's unclick that. So now we can actually start to use this information. So let's go into our scripts, and we'll go into, first of all, we start with the select car UI handler. So let's open that. So now in our select car UI handler, let's create a new variable, and we are going to use our car data, and it's going to be an array because we're going to have multiple car data. So that's why I'm adding a car datas. Then we want to load our data. So we want to load the information that we have, and we do that in the start function. So let's use resource.loadAll, and it takes in the type. So it loads all car data and puts it in our car data's array. And it takes it from the resource folder, and then we just append the folder that we wanted to look in, and the sort of, in this folder, and then we have to end it with a / so it knows where to look. So now that we have our data in our array, we want to make sure that we know which car the user has selected. And it's going to be an index inside this array. So we start with the value of 0. Then as the user is either sort of pushing the arrow keys, or if we're building some type of UI, we need a function so they can go to the previous car, and we want to be able to allow them to go to the next car. So we'll use public functions so we can access them through a UI and the outside of this script. And what we have then is we have this way of detecting if we are pressing the left arrow key. And the left arrow key is that we should go backwards. So we should go to our sort of the previous car, and if you press the right arrow key, we're going to go to the left car. So what we want is we want to change this start coroutine, and we move it into this on previous car and also on next car. Okay, so if we're pressing our left arrow key, it means that we want to access the previous car. And if we are going to listen for the right arrow key, let's do the reversed. So then we have on our on next car being called. So if we are calling the next car, let's start with that. So what we do then is we are going to increment our selected car index. So we just go selected car index ++, that adds 1 to our selected car index. And then we have to be careful so it's not actually going outside of the size of the array. So let's make sure that if it's larger than the length -1, then it becomes 0. So we want to stay within this, and the reason why we're using -1 is because we have a index starting at 0. So then we are starting at index 0. So if we are going outside of this, it's going to loop back to the first car. And then we do the same thing if we're going to the previous car. So we'll take the car and do it the other way around. And we are checking if the selected car index is smaller than 0, then we are going to put the select car index to car data length -1. So in our script we have used this is changing car to make sure that we are not calling our start coroutine if it's already running. So we want to move this into our functions here. So let's get rid of that up here and there. We can just copy this variable. And then we are saying that, okay, if it is already changing car, then we are going to just return. We're going to ignore it. And the same thing for on next car. Okay, so that's all good. Now we are cycling the data, but we're not really doing anything with it. So when we are spawning the car, we want to actually utilize this information. And we want to change the sprite of the car. And to do that, we actually need to enhance our script that handles that part. So we want to go back into our car UI handler. So let's select that script. So in our car UI handler, we want to add another part of it, and we want to be able to access the image of it. So we want to be able to change the sprite. So we need to add this using unityengine.ui so we can access the images. And we want to be able to say to sort of this script that, yeah, this is the image for the car. So we have the car image. Then we want to be able to, from the other script, tell this script that, okay, you need to update how the car looks. So let's add a new public variable or public function, and we'll call it setup car. And it takes in a car data. So we take in the car data and we change the car image sprite to whatever is in the car data's UI sprite. So when we are calling this, it will actually update the image of the car. So let's save that and let's go back into our select car UI handler. So now we can use the new function when we are instantiating the car and we have gotten access to the car UI handler. We can actually call setup car and provide it with the car data. So we're passing in the array, but the specific element that is in the selected car index. Perfect. Then we actually have a tiny bug, and it's on previous car is calling this start car routine spawn car is car appearing on right side, which is correct, but it's shouldn't be appearing on the right side when we're pressing the right arrow button. So let's change this to false, and let's save that. Now we can try it in Unity. Alright, so now we're back in Unity, and I noticed that we still have our car prefab here, which we shouldn't, so let's get rid of that one. And then we want to change our car UI object prefab, and let's open that, and we want to use this car image. So let's drag and drop the car image over there, and now when we take it for a spin, we should be able to change cars. So if we place the left arrow button, it is changing to the blue car, and if we are changing the right arrow button, it's going in the right direction. So that's awesome, and we can hold it down and it goes really fast, and it's actually going a tiny bit too fast. So we need to probably increase our delay in our coroutine so it has more time to actually show the animation, but we can change that a little bit later. So now that we can change cars, we also want the user to be able to select a car and then take that car and use it when we're actually driving inside the game. So let's go into our scripts, and let's open our select car UI handler. So when we're in here, let's quickly just change that delay. So let's increase the wait delay to 0.4 instead, so we give more time for the animation to actually complete. Then it will look better when we're swapping cars really fast. Okay, so now that we have solved that, we want to allow the user to select their car. So let's create a function for that, similar to as we have on next car. So let's do an on select car, and like that. And there are a lot of ways that we can do this. Often you use something like a game manager. So the game manager will store the information that, yeah, this is the car that the user has selected. So when we are loading the next scene, that information is still available. But we're going to cheat a little bit, and we're going to make it even easier for us. So we're going to use our player prefs that we have used before, that is also available through different scenes. So this is a way that Unity has that is built in, that allows you to load and save data, and it works on most platforms. So let's use that. So we'll use a player prefs, and we'll use a set integer, and we'll call it play1 selected car ID, and then we assign it to we assign the value that we have received from our car data and the selected car index of the unique car ID. So and what if we want to have multiple users, and we want to have support maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 users? So what do we do then? Yeah, we do this the same way. We just store that as different values inside our player prefs. Now the downside with this is that all the users will have the same car, but you can easily extend this by having 4 different type of select cars windows and allow each user to select them, but it's slightly outside of the scope of this tutorial. So for now we're just gonna get 4 cars, and they're all gonna look alike. And then we are going to use player prefs save, so we save the data, and then we are going to actually start the game. So how we do that is we're going to use the Unity scene management. So let's declare that using Unity scene management. And once we have received our onSelect car, we're going to load a scene, and we're going to add a new scene called spawn car. But we also need to listen for the keyboard inputs for this, because now it's only a function, so we need to use it when the user is pressing a certain key on the keyboard. So let's check if the user is pressing, let's say, the space key, then we'll call the onSelect car. Okay, perfect. So if we save this and go back into Unity, so if we run it now, we should be able to select our different cars, and we can hold down the arrow key and it moves really fast without breaking the animation. And then we can hit space, and we'll get a big error saying that spawn car could not be loaded because it's not added in the build settings. So it means that it can't really find a scene, and to be fair, we haven't created a scene yet, so that's normal. So let's take one of our scenes. Let's open, let's take the jump scene, and we want to save this work so we don't lose it. We should actually save more often. Okay, so now we have our beautiful scene here, and let's save this as, and we'll go into scenes, and we'll use spawn car as the name. Perfect. Now if we run the menu and repeat the same process again, we will still get the same error because it's not added to the build. So how we solve that is going to build settings and then press this add open scene, and we'll see that it's actually included spawn car. So now we can actually repeat our process, and let's open our menu. And let's press play, and now we can select car. We'll take the blue one, press space to select it, and it's loading the scene. Awesome. But as we see, it's not the blue car, and the reason why it's not the blue car is because we haven't started to use this. So let's stop our script and go into our scene that we just created, our spawn car scene. So let's get rid of our car, because we are going to spawn new cars, so we don't need a car to be in here when we start. And then we need to be able to create some spawn points. So where should the car spawn? And we do that by creating an empty game object, and we'll call it spawn point. And let's reset the position of that. So reset, right click, reset. So now it's on 0, 0. And we want the car to start somewhere here. And maybe we want to actually use a different indication. So let's change how it looks, and we'll use these red things. And the gizmos is not showing for some reason, so let's see why. And right. So let's disable the 3D icons, and then it's showing. Okay, perfect. So for us to be able to actually use these spawn points, we will change, add a tag to them, just as we had with checkpoints. So let's add a tag, and we'll call them spawn points instead. And then let's select the spawn point. So we want to have 4 spawn points, 1 for each car. 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. And then we need a way of spawning the cars. So we need to create a new script for that. So let's go and create a new script, and we'll call it spawn cars. And let's take our camera, because I like to assign things to the camera that is going to be used, and have it there. And then we can open it in Visual Studio. So we can get rid of our update function, because we are not going to use that. And then we want to be able to find our spawn points. So we'll create a game object, an array of spawn points. and we will use game object, find game objects with tag, and then use our spawn point. Then all of the spawn points will be assigned to this. Then what we want to do is load our car data. So let's load up our car data, so we have that. And after that, we want to go through our spawn points array to make sure that we're spawning all of our players. So we'll use a for loop and we'll go through the full length of the spawn points. And what we do then is that we're going to say, okay, the transform that we're spawning on, the transform spawn point, is going to be the index that we're currently on and its transform. So it's going to take the spawn points and its transform. So then we have a place where we can spawn the car. Then we want to see, okay, what player car, what car has the player selected? So we have we can declare variables and call it player selected car ID, and then we get it from our player prefs, and we are saying that, okay, so we know that it's going to say P1, 2, 3, 4. So we take our I, which starts at 0, and +1. So then this is going to change then into P1, P2, P3, P4 as we're looping through the spawn points. Awesome. So the only problem we have now is that this car ID is something that we need to figure out, okay, which prefab is that actually. So we go through all of our car data to try to find it. And we are going to use a for each in this case. So we are going through our car data in car datas. Then what we want to do is we want to see, okay, have we found the player's car, the player's selected car. So if the car data that we have loaded is the same as the car's selected player car ID, then it's the correct car. So great, then we can spawn it. And what we do then is we use our instantiate, and we'll take the car prefab from the car data and the spawn point as the position and the spawn point as the rotation. So then we can move around the spawn points and also rotate them to get the cars to face different directions. And we keep a reference to the instantiated car. So what we want after we have done that is to make sure that the car can actually be controlled by the player. So the first player has a certain set of keys, player 2 has other keys, etc. So we need to tell our player car which keys it should listen to. And we actually already have that support in the car input handler. So let's get our component, get component car input handler, and then we will use player number is equal to I plus 1. And then it's important that once we have found this car, or it's not super important, but it saves a little bit of performance, we can stop looping through this for each loop. So when we have found the correct car, there is no point in continuing, so we break it, and then it just exits below here, and it loops around with the for loop, and then it goes through all of our spawn points, and after that it's going to be done. So let's save that and go back into Unity. So now if we hit play, then our cars will spawn, and we can see that they spawned in the upward direction. So we need to change the rotation of the spawn points. So let's change the Z and make it 90, and actually we need to do the same on the others. So let's change that on all of them, and then hit play, and then the cars should be spawning the correct orientation. Okay, so now we can actually run around with the different buttons for each player, and yeah, it works. So let's go back into our menu and try the full flow. And we want to save, yes. So then we take it for a spin, and let's select a car, and now we can select the different cars. Let's pick the red one this time, press space to run, and now we have 4 red cars. So the car data recorder and the ghost play recorder that we added before, it has essentially no clue that we have swapped the colors of the car. So to solve that, we need to change that, but that's a later problem. What we want to do maybe now is, while we're in the UI, we might want to add some buttons to this as well. So let's add some buttons, and we'll go under UI, and we'll take button, and let's move it down here and change it to a little bit bigger. This is going to be our left button, so let's use the smaller sign for that, and we'll make it bold and change the font to maybe 50, 70, 100. That's big. 90. All right, awesome. 90. So we'll call it previous car button, and when it's getting clicked, let's use our nice function that we have already created. So on previous car, and then we'll do the same for our next car. So let's just swap the position, make the sign larger, change the function as well when we are calling it on next. And then we want to have a select car, so let's add that, and we'll put it in center below, and let's make it bigger, maybe 300, 250, and let's change the text to select car. Just let's use select, and we need to make it a little bit smaller, so maybe 60, 50. Select car, and let's call that function select. Awesome. So let's save that, and now we can take that for a spin and see how it works. So as we can see, nothing is working, and the reason is because we're missing one important thing, and the buttons are using events, and there is no event handler for some reason. So let's create that. And we need a UI. Where am I? Game object, UI, and event system. Perfect. So now if we play it again, we should get some reactions from our nice buttons. All right, awesome. So now we can change the car any way we want to, and it works. So this concludes today's session, and now you have the ability to add your own cars, and to add more car data, and to customize them, and to select them and run them on levels. So now we've gone through how you can add multiple cars, switch them, and use scriptable objects to enhance your cars with additional data. So I'll just want to show one last thing, and that is I've added a third racing card, a Racer Yellow, and the reason why I have added this one in front of it is because this is the sorting order that Unity has. It's sorting alphabetically. So if I have a Racer Yellow as the third car, then if I want to swap it to be this first car, then I can just change this value to 0. And if I run now again, then that car will actually be the first car that gets spawned. So that is a pretty cool way of sorting data and making it easier to have it appear in the order you want to. So this concludes today's video, and of course you can enhance these scriptable objects with a lot of information about your cars, the max speed, anything really. So scriptable objects are super useful to use for data storage. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up, and also consider hitting that subscribe button if you want to get a notification when the next video is out. I'd also like to give a special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters, and especially MSGS Europe, that has reached the WOW level in our benefits on Patreon. The link to our Patreon page is in the description below, so please consider supporting us there. Here's an example from our game, Total Arcade Racing, which uses this component for its physics, inputs and other parts. You can find the game on Steam, Xbox and Nintendo Switch. Please take it for a spin if you want.